Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The January wind howled beyond the windows of Ollivander's shop, carrying with it thick snowflakes. Inside, it was warm and cozy. The shop, restored after the war, breathed magic once more, and the shelves groaned under the weight of thousands of wand boxes, each containing a unique destiny. Garrick Ollivander sat in his favorite armchair beside the fireplace, rubbing his weary hands. 10 years had passed since those terrible events, 10 years of restoration, healing, and return to life. His hair had turned completely silver, and his face bore new lines, but his eyes retained that same piercing wisdom they had always held. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the clouds when a gentle knock sounded at the door. "Enter," said Ollivander, without looking up from the fire. 4 young people stepped into the room, Hogwarts students as could be gathered from their appearance. A Ravenclaw girl with books tucked under her arm, a Hufflepuff boy with cheeks reddened by frost, a Gryffindor girl with a determined gaze, and finally, a Slytherin boy who kept somewhat apart from the others. "Mr. Ollivander," began the Ravenclaw girl, "we are 7th-year students. We're working on a history of magic project about the influence of wands on the fates of famous wizards. Professor Binns said that you remember them all." Ollivander smiled, finally raising his gaze. "Every wand, every wizard," he said quietly. "Sit down, young friends. The house elf will bring us tea, and I shall tell you what few know." The students settled themselves around the fireplace, in soft armchairs and on footstools. Ollivander waved his wand, and a tea service appeared in the air, filling the room with the aroma of jasmine and honey. "You wish to know about distinguished wizards," he continued, gazing into the fire. "But are you prepared to hear about the dark ones as well? For a wand makes no distinction between good and evil. It simply senses power, potential, the depth of a person's magical essence." The Hufflepuff boy stirred. "You mean, you know who?" Ollivander nodded, and his eyes grew distant, as though he were once again in that long-ago day. "Tom Riddle." He spoke the name, causing the students to shudder involuntarily. "Yes, I remember the day he came to me. It was, yes, the summer of 1938. I was only 28 then, and had just taken over the business from my grandfather." The fire crackled particularly loudly, as if responding to the mention of the Dark Lord. Tall for 11 years old, lanky, with strangely adult eyes, hair black as a winter's night, and his gaze, oh, that gaze. There is nothing more frightening than a child with adult eyes, full of hunger. Not hunger for food, hunger for power. Ollivander took a sip of tea, savoring memories that both enchanted and terrified. He entered the shop so quietly that at first I didn't notice him. He simply stood among the shelves, looking at the wand boxes. When I asked how I might help, he turned to me and said, "Oh, what a voice he had even then," he said. "I need a wand. The best one." "And you immediately understood that he was special?" asked the Gryffindor girl. "Special is putting it mildly, my dear child," smiled Ollivander. Tom Riddle radiated magic like a furnace radiates heat. It surrounded him in an invisible aura, and when he passed by the shelves, the little wands in their boxes began to hum softly. I had never seen such a thing. Ollivander rose and approached one of the shelves, as if searching for something with his eyes. First I tried the standard options. Oak with unicorn hair. No, the wand didn't even produce any sparks. Maple with dragon heartstring. Nothing either. And then I felt a calling. From the very furthest shelf, where the rarest specimens are kept. "The yew wand," whispered the Ravenclaw girl. 13.5 inches of yew wood with a phoenix feather core, confirmed Ollivander. Yew, the wood of death and rebirth. Its wand would never choose an ordinary wizard. And the feather was special. Fawkes, Professor Dumbledore's phoenix, gave only 2 feathers for wands. Silence fell upon the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "When he took it in his hands," continued Ollivander, "a stream of gold and red sparks burst from the tip, so bright that I was nearly blinded. But these were not ordinary sparks of joy. No, they pulsed in time with the boy's heartbeat, and in their light I saw shadows. Shadows of the future, which gripped the world by the throat." "Did you know he would become a Dark Lord?" asked the Hufflepuff boy anxiously. Ollivander shook his head. "A wand does not show the future, child. It shows essence. And Tom Riddle's essence was empty, like the reverse side of a mirror. Even then he was not an ordinary person, he was thirst made flesh. Thirst for immortality, power, absolute control. Ollivander returned to his chair, his face darkening with memories. He paid and left, but before going he asked about other wands like his. I explained to him about the uniqueness of each wand, about how no two are exactly alike. Then he smiled, and in that smile was such cold satisfaction, as if he had just received something extraordinarily valuable and was already planning how to use it. The Slytherin boy, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. And the others? Those who served him. Bellatrix Lestrange, said Ollivander, and the name sounded like a curse. She came a year before Tom. Bellatrix Black then. 10 years old, curly hair, enormous dark eyes. A beautiful child, but from the first glance it was clear, madness seethed within her. Ollivander rose again and walked about the room, his steps soft on the old carpet. Walnut wood, 12¼ inches, with a dragon heartstring core. Walnut, a capricious wood that chooses only those who can master their passions. But in Bellatrix's case, she did not master them. They mastered her. What happened when she took the wand? Whispered the Ravenclaw girl. The flash was purple, almost black. The sparks danced around her like living creatures, and she laughed. Oh, how she laughed! That laughter haunted me for years. And it was such joy in destruction, such delight in chaos. I understood then that I had created an instrument that would bring pain to the world. Ollivander sat back in his chair, his face looking weary. But the most terrible thing was not that she became a killer. The most terrible thing was that she remained a child. Even as an adult, even while committing atrocities, Bellatrix retained childlike directness in her cruelty. She tortured people with the same innocent joy with which other children catch butterflies. Silence again enveloped the room. The students exchanged worried glances. And Lucius Malfoy? Finally asked the Gryffindor girl. Ollivander's smile became bitter. Ah, Lucius. He was different. He arrived in the summer of 1965 in a luxurious carriage, accompanied by 2 house elves and his father. Even then, at 11 years old, he had the manners of an adult aristocrat and the gaze of someone who never doubted his own superiority. Ollivander poured himself more tea, watching the steam rise from the cup. Elmwood, 18 inches, unusually long for a child, with a dragon heartstring core. Elm, the wood of dignity and elegance, but also of pride. It chooses those born to command, but can make them blind to their own mistakes. And did this wand also show something dark? Asked the Hufflepuff boy. No, Ollivander shook his head. The sparks were white and silver, beautiful and cold, like a winter morning. But in their beauty was disdain. The wand responded to his magic, but also to his conviction of his own exceptionalism. Lucius was not born evil like Tom, nor was he mad like Bellatrix. He simply never doubted that pure-blood wizards were superior to all others. Ollivander paused, gazing into the fire. The saddest thing about his story is that he could have been a great leader. He had charisma, intelligence, power. But instead of using these gifts to improve the world, he chose the comfort of old prejudices. He followed the Dark Lord not out of a thirst for destruction, but out of fear of change. Why are you telling us about them? Quietly asked the Slytherin boy. Why about dark wizards? Ollivander looked at him, and in his eyes flashed the wisdom of centuries. Because, young friend, a wand does not create a wizard. It merely reveals what is already inside. Tom Riddle, Bellatrix Lestrange, Lucius Malfoy, all of them had the opportunity to choose a different path. Their wands were ready to serve both good and evil. He rose and approached the window, looking out at the snow-covered Diagon Alley. I tell you about them so that you understand. Darkness is not born ready-made. It grows from small decisions, from small compromises, from refusing to see others' pain. Tom began by torturing animals in the orphanage. Bellatrix, with cruel jokes about younger children. Lucius, with the conviction that his bloodline made him better than others. The fire in the fireplace died down to embers, casting soft red reflections on the old wandmaker's face. But remember also that even the darkest hearts are capable of repentance. Even Lucius ultimately chose his son over his lord. Even Bellatrix had moments of clarity. And Tom, Tom could have become the greatest wizard of all time, had he not lost the ability to love. The students sat quietly, digesting what they had heard. Finally, the Ravenclaw girl spoke. It's frightening to know that a wand maker can predict a person's fate. No, child, Ollivander gently objected. I do not predict fate. I simply see potential. And what to do with that potential? The choice always remains with the person. Even the darkest wand can serve the light, if its owner so wishes. He returned to his chair and sat down, his face brightening again. And now, my young friends, would you like to hear about those who chose the light? About teachers and protectors, about those whose hearts burned not with thirst for power, but with the desire to guard and teach. The student's eyes lit up with interest, and Ollivander smiled. The night was long, memories were countless, and stories about good were always worth telling after stories about evil, to remind oneself. Light is always stronger than darkness. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, covering Diagon Alley with a white blanket of forgetfulness. But inside the old shop, memory lived on, preserving in the wandmaker's recollections all the fates that had passed through his hands, dark and light, simple and great, tragic and beautiful. And Garrick Ollivander, the last of an ancient line of wandmakers, continued his tale, knowing that each story was a lesson, each memory a warning, and each wand an opportunity to change the world. Evil is not born instantly. It grows gradually, feeding on small weaknesses and great fears. But good grows the same way, from small acts of kindness, from decisions to help, from readiness to fight for others. And the wand, wise and neutral, serves the one who chose it, regardless of whether that choice leads to light or to darkness. The fire in the fireplace blazed brightly once more. Ollivander barely perceptibly waved his wand, and warmth filled the room. The students relaxed somewhat after the difficult memories of dark wizards, whilst outside the window the day slowly moved into its second half. And now, he said, his voice becoming warmer, allow me to tell you about those who chose a different path, about those whose hearts from earliest childhood were drawn to protecting and teaching others. The Gryffindor girl leaned forward. You mean our professors? Precisely, smiled Ollivander. Minerva McGonagall, Severus Snape, Filius Flitwick, Pomona Sprout, each of them came to me as a child, and each already carried within them the seed of a future teacher. He rose and approached another shelf, where particularly old boxes stood. I shall begin with Minerva. September 1947. I was then a young craftsman, only 5 years since taking over the business, and I still grew nervous before particularly talented children. And Minerva McGonagall, oh, she was special from the first step into the shop. Ollivander touched one of the boxes, and it seemed his fingers could feel the echo of long-past magical vibrations. An 11-year-old girl, but with the bearing of an adult woman. Hair gathered in perfect plaits, robes pressed without a single crease, and her gaze, so piercing that for a moment I thought, she is testing me, not the other way round. The Hufflepuff boy laughed. Yes, that sounds very much like Professor McGonagall. She entered and said, Good day, Mr. Ollivander. I am Minerva McGonagall. I require a wand for my studies at Hogwarts. No trembling, no excitement, purely businesslike. But when I began showing her wands, I witnessed something marvelous. Ollivander returned to his chair, his eyes dancing with memories. The first wand, oak with unicorn hair, produced only weak sparks. The second, maple with dragon heartstring, didn't respond at all. And then I retrieved a special wand, fir, 9.5 inches, with a dragon heartstring core. Fir, repeated the Ravenclaw girl. That's a rare wood for wands, is it not? Very rare, confirmed Ollivander. Fir is particular about its owners. It chooses only those who combine strength and wisdom, determination and caution. When Minerva took the wand in her hands, he paused, as if seeing that distant scene again. The flash was green-gold, like autumn leaves in sunlight. The sparks didn't simply fly from the tip. They formed a complex pattern around her, like a protective circle. And then something incredible happened. The sparks grouped themselves into the shape of a cat, a small, graceful kitten that ran around her feet for several seconds, then dissolved into silver dust. Her animagus form, exclaimed the Slytherin boy. You saw her future animagus form. Precisely, nodded Ollivander. The wand didn't simply choose her, it showed me who she would become. Minerva watched this wonder with such a serious expression, as if analyzing a complex spell. And then she asked, Is this normal? No surprise, no fear, pure practicality. Ollivander poured himself more tea, a smile playing on his lips. I explained to her about the peculiarities of fir wands, about how they choose future leaders and protectors. Minerva listened carefully, paid, and was preparing to leave. But at the door she stopped and asked, Mr. Ollivander, what should one do if the wand proves stronger than oneself? I answered her then what I remember to this day. Child, a wand is never stronger than its heart. And you have the heart of a warrior. The students sat spellbound. The Gryffindor girl said quietly, and she truly became a warrior. In the war against Voldemort. Yes, agreed Ollivander. But first she became a teacher. And that, in a way, is an even greater challenge. To teach someone magic means to entrust them with a piece of your soul. Silence descended upon the room, only the fire quietly crackling in the fireplace. Finally, the Hufflepuff boy asked, "And Professor Snape? You said that all the teachers had within them the seed of a mentor." Ollivander's face noticeably darkened, and he remained silent for a long time, gazing into the fire. "Severus Snape," he finally said. "This is one of the most complex stories I remember. August 1971, in the midst of the hottest summer in 20 years. The boy entered the shop, trembling with nervousness. The robes he wore were old, patched, clearly inherited. Ollivander rose and again approached the shelves, this time to those standing in shadow. Thin, with long greasy hair and a large nose. But his eyes, oh what eyes! Dark, intelligent, full of pain and pride simultaneously. He stood in the doorway and looked at me as if expecting mockery or refusal. "Did he look like a future teacher?" asked the Ravenclaw girl. "Quite the opposite." Ollivander shook his head. "He looked like someone who had fled from the world and was hiding within his own soul. When I asked his name, he whispered, 'Severus Snape,' and his voice trembled, not from the heat but from uncertainty." Ollivander touched another box, and on his face appeared an expression of painful understanding. The first wand he rejected without even taking it in his hands, oak with unicorn hair. "That's not for me," he said. The second, maple with dragon heartstring, he took, but it gave only weak red sparks, as if struggling with him. And then, he fell silent, as if it were difficult to continue. Then I felt a special calling from the highest shelf. A birch wand, 13 inches, with a phoenix feather core. Birch, the wood of purification and rebirth. A complex wood that chooses those capable of change, who can pass through darkness and find light. "And what happened?" whispered the Slytherin boy. "When Severus took the wand, at first nothing occurred. We both tensed. Sometimes a wand needs time to recognize its owner. And then something incredible began." Ollivander sat back in his chair, his eyes distant. The flash was not of one color, but several at once. First dark green, the color of Slytherin, the color of ambition. Then red, the color of passion and pain. And finally, silver, pure as morning dew. The sparks swirled around him, as if trying to understand who he truly was. And he? How did he react? He stood motionless as a statue, watching the sparks with wide eyes. And then, I shall never forget this, a tear rolled down his cheek. A single tear. He wiped it away and asked, "Why did it choose me?" Ollivander took a deep breath. I told him the truth, because it sees in you what you do not see in yourself. The potential for greatness. He paid, with small coins, obviously all the money he had, and was preparing to leave. But at the door he stopped and said, "I won't be a good wizard." And I replied, "Perhaps, but you will be powerful. And power is a tool. Everything depends on how you use it." Silence again reigned in the room. Finally, the Gryffindor girl said quietly, "He truly became powerful, and ultimately chose good." "Yes," nodded Ollivander. "But what a thorny path that was." The birch wand was not mistaken. Severus truly had the potential for rebirth. But first he had to plunge himself into darkness to understand what light was worth. He rose and approached the window, watching the falling snow. "And now allow me to tell you about someone completely different. Phileas Flitwick, summer 1958. The smallest 11-year-old wizard I had ever seen, but with the biggest heart." A smile returned to Ollivander's face. He entered the shop with his mother, a goblin, and immediately began excitedly examining the shelves. "Wow, how many there are! And this one's beautiful. And this one too." Pure enthusiasm, no fear or nervousness. "Was he like the Professor Flitwick we know?" asked the Hufflepuff boy. "Absolutely," laughed Ollivander. "The same sparkle in his eyes, the same sincere joy and magic. When I began showing him wands, he commented on each one. 'Oh, this one's lovely, but not mine. And this one's interesting, but doesn't suit either.'" Ollivander returned to his chair, his face glowing with warm memories. "And then I retrieved a cherry wand, 10 inches, with a unicorn hair core. Cherry, the wood of precision and elegance, which chooses those capable of transforming the most complex magic into art. And it suited him? How it did!" Ollivander clapped his hands. When Phileas took it in his hands, not simply sparks flew from the tip, an entire firework of miniature golden stars. They danced in the air, forming intricate patterns, and then put on a real show. Each star played its own melody, and the entire shop filled with enchanting music. The students listened, spellbound. Phileas clapped his hands and cried, "This is the most wonderful magic I've ever seen." And his mother smiled and said, "My son always finds beauty in everything." And it was true. The wand chose him not simply for magical power, but for his ability to see wonder in the simplest things. Ollivander took a sip of tea. When they left, Phileas turned around several times and waved his wand at me. Each time, new sparks flew from it, sometimes in the form of butterflies, sometimes as flowers. He was already experimenting then, seeking new ways to use magic. A true researcher and artist at the same time. "And Professor Sprout?" asked the Ravenclaw girl. Ollivander's face was again illuminated by a warm smile. "Pomona Sprout, August 1963. She came to me with earth under her fingernails and a dandelion leaf in her hair. She looked like an ordinary country girl, but the magic around her pulsed like a living creature." "How so?" "Imagine." Ollivander spread his arms. She walks down Diagon Alley, and flowers and pots turn towards her by themselves as if greeting her. Birds take flight from rooftops and circle around her. Even my shop seemed to come alive. The wooden shelves creaked softly, like trees in a forest. He rose and approached a shelf with the oldest boxes. Pomona entered and immediately said, "It smells of old oak and magic. I like it." And then she asked, "Might I look at wands made from oak wood? It seems to me the oak is calling to me." She immediately knew what she needed. "Some wizards have a natural connection with plants," explained Ollivander. Pomona was one of them. I showed her an oak wand, 12 inches, with a dragon heartstring core. Oak, the king of trees, symbol of strength and longevity, which chooses those capable of protecting and nurturing life. And what happened? When she took the wand, the shop filled with the aroma of spring forest. The sparks were green as young leaves, and each one, touching the floor, transformed into a tiny flower. Within seconds, a real garden grew around Pomona, miniature but alive. Ollivander touched the floor, as if he could still feel the echo of that ancient magic. Pomona looked at the flowers with such tenderness, the way a mother looks at a child. And then she leaned down and whispered something to them. I couldn't hear what, but the flowers seemed to nod in response and began slowly disappearing, leaving behind only a faint fragrance. She was talking to them? Pomona always talked to plants, smiled Ollivander. They understood her, and she understood them. When she paid for the wand, she asked, "How should one care for an oak wand? It's alive, isn't it?" I explained everything I knew, and she listened carefully, occasionally nodding and murmuring, "Yes, yes, I see." He returned to his chair. When Pomona left, I noticed something strange. Where she had stepped, tiny green shoots appeared on the old floorboards of the shop. They lasted only a few seconds, but I understood. This girl would bring life wherever she went. The students sat quietly, absorbing the stories they had heard. Finally, the Slytherin boy asked, "Why did they all become teachers? What was common in their wands?" Ollivander pondered, gazing into the fire. "You know, young friend, I thought about this for many years, and I understood one thing. Each of their wands chose them not simply for magical abilities. It saw something more in them, readiness to share their knowledge." He rose and walked about the room. Minerva had the strength to protect, but also the patience to teach. Severus had deep knowledge, but also the ability to see potential in others, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Phileas had joy in magic, but also the skill to pass that joy to others. And Pomona had a connection with life, but also the wisdom to teach others to nurture and care. "So a wand can predict that someone will become a teacher?" asked the Gryffindor girl. "Not predict," objected Ollivander. "Recognize. A true teacher is not someone who simply knows much. It's someone ready to give a piece of themselves so that others might grow. And a wand senses this." He sat back in his chair, his face becoming serious. "But the most marvelous thing is not that they all became teachers. The most marvelous thing is that each of them, despite all difficulties, preserved that spark I saw in their childhood. Minerva remained just and strong. Phileas, joyful and enchanted by magic. Pomona, caring and wise. And Severus." He paused, and the students waited. Severus found his light. Late, through pain and mistakes, but he found it, and ultimately became the teacher his wand had hoped for from the very beginning. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, but in the room there was a warm atmosphere of memories about goodness and wisdom. The evening light softly illuminated Ollivander's face as he looked at the young students and thought about what teachers, perhaps, sat before him now, not yet knowing their fate. "And now," he said, "would you like to hear about the greatest of all? About a wizard whose wand changed the course of history not once, but twice?" The student's eyes again lit up with interest, and Ollivander smiled, preparing to tell about Albus Dumbledore, the most complex and greatest soul he had ever been destined to meet. The fire in the fireplace blazed brighter again, as if preparing to illuminate the most important of all stories. The fire in the fireplace had died down to soft embers, casting long shadows on the shop walls. Through the window one could see the day slowly fading, turning to evening. Ollivander remained silent for a long time, gazing into the flames, as if gathering his thoughts before the most important tale. The students waited patiently. They sensed they were about to hear something special. "Albus Dumbledore," the old wandmaker finally said, and in his voice sounded particular reverence. "June 1892. The brightest memory of my childhood, and at the same time the most complex puzzle of my entire life." He rose and approached the oldest shelf, to boxes covered with the dust of centuries. "I was only 2 years old then, so naturally I do not remember those events. But my grandfather, Gervas Ollivander, told me this story again and again, until I memorized every detail. He said that even at such an early age I could sense the magic of wands, and on that day," Ollivander touched one of the boxes, and it seemed his fingers trembled from the echo of long-past magical vibrations. "On that day all the wands in the shop began to hum simultaneously. Thousands of wands, each with its own voice, and all of them singing. My grandfather was at first frightened. Such a thing had never happened. And then a boy entered through the door." The Ravenclaw girl leaned forward. "And you immediately understood it was something special?" "My dear child," smiled Ollivander, "when all the wands in a shop sing, it can mean only one thing. He who is destined to change the world has arrived." Albus Dumbledore, at 11 years old, already possessed that same aura of wisdom that would surround him all his life. He returned to his chair, but did not sit, instead standing and leaning against the back. Tall for his age, thin, with a long straight nose and penetrating blue eyes behind spectacles covering half his face. Hair reddish, but even then with silver strands, as if time had touched him earlier than other children. Did he truly look like a future great wizard? No, Ollivander answered unexpectedly. He looked like someone who carried a burden, someone who had already seen more than a child should see. Later I learned about his sister Ariana, about what happened to her after the Muggle attack. Albus already then bore the burden of responsibility for his family, pain for his suffering sister, and he was transforming this pain into determination to become stronger. Ollivander finally sat down, his face becoming serious. My grandfather began showing him wands, but something strange happened with each one. They didn't simply fail to suit, they seemed to fear him. Oak gave weak sparks and fell silent. Maple didn't react at all. Ash trembled in his hands. "Why?" asked the Hufflepuff boy. "Because Albus's magic was too deep, too complex for ordinary wands. He needed a wand capable of withstanding not simply great power, but power with great responsibility." Ollivander rose and again approached that old shelf. And then my grandfather felt a calling. From the very top, from a box he kept for special occasions. A cypress wand, 15 inches, unusually long even for an adult wizard, with a phoenix feather core. "Cypress?" repeated the Gryffindor girl. "What sort of wood is that?" "Cypress," Ollivander said solemnly. "The wood of eternity and sacrifice. Its wands choose only those ready to live a heroic life. Ancient masters said, 'A cypress wand never errs in choosing its owner, for it knows the fate of every person.'" He touched the box, and from it seemed to emanate a faint glow. When Albus took the wand in his hands, the shop fell silent. Not a sound, not a movement, as if the entire world held its breath. And then, Ollivander paused, as if seeking words to describe the impossible. Then began the most beautiful and most terrible thing I have ever witnessed. From the wand's tip flowed not sparks, but light. Pure, white light that filled the entire shop and spilled out onto the street. It did not blind, did not burn. On the contrary, it gave a feeling of absolute peace and protection. The students listened with bated breath. But in this light I saw shadows. Shadows of the future, wars, death, sacrifice. And among these shadows, the figure of Albus himself, old, wise, so weary. He stood between light and darkness, holding them in balance at the cost of his own life. You saw his future? Whispered the Slytherin boy. I saw his destiny, replied Ollivander. The cypress wand showed me not simply the future, it showed purpose. Albus Dumbledore was born to become a shield between light and darkness, and this wand was ready to serve him in that mission. Ollivander returned to his chair, but again did not sit. Albus stood holding the wand, gazing at the light with such an expression, as if reading the book of his own life. And then he quietly asked, "What does this mean?" My grandfather told him the truth. It means you are chosen to bear a burden that others cannot carry. And how did he react? He nodded. Ollivander simply replied. An 11-year-old boy nodded, as if accepting a sentence. He did not cry, did not become frightened, did not begin to protest. He simply accepted. And in that moment I understood that the light had chosen correctly. Ollivander finally sat down, his face becoming thoughtful. He paid for the wand, with golden galleons, which was rare for an 11-year-old wizard, and was preparing to leave. But at the door he stopped and asked, "What if I fail to justify its trust?" My grandfather replied, "Then the world will become darker." But I do not think that will happen. Silence descended upon the room. Ollivander gazed into the fire, as if seeing in it the echo of that distant day. The cypress wand served Albus faithfully and truly for over 50 years. It was with him when he studied at Hogwarts, when he researched magic with Nicholas Flamel, when... He stopped, his face darkening. When he met Gellert Grindelwald. The students exchanged glances. Grindelwald's name was known to all who studied the history of magic. That wand witnessed Albus's greatest mistake, continued Ollivander, when he became fascinated with Grindelwald's ideas about wizard dominion over muggles. When he forgot what it had been created for. What happened? The tragedy at Godric's Hollow, Ollivander said quietly. Ariana's death, the end of his friendship with Grindelwald. And Albus understood the price of his own ambitions. The cypress wand did not abandon him. On the contrary, it became even stronger, because its owner finally understood the difference between power and wisdom. He rose and again approached the window, looking out at the snowy Diagon Alley. The following years Albus devoted to teaching others, atoning for his mistakes. And the cypress wand, it waited for the moment when its true power would be needed. For the battle with Grindelwald? Precisely, nodded Ollivander. 1945, the most legendary duel in the history of magic. Two of the most powerful wands in the world clashed in a battle that would decide the fate of the entire magical world. He returned to the students, his eyes burning with memories. Grindelwald possessed the Elder Wand, the most powerful wand in the world, one of the Deathly Hallows. But Albus had something more. He had righteous anger and understanding of what he was fighting for. And the cypress wand helped him defeat the Elder Wand. Ollivander smiled a sad smile. It was not wand defeating wand, child. It was love defeating hatred, wisdom defeating ambition. Albus won not because his wand was stronger, but because he fought for the right cause. He sat back in his chair. After the victory, Albus gained the Elder Wand. And this began a new chapter of his life, and a new burden. For the Elder Wand brings not only power, but also a curse. It makes its owner a target for all who thirst for power. So what happened to the cypress wand? Albus kept it, replied Ollivander. He hid it in his office, like his most precious treasure. For the cypress wand was not simply a tool. It was part of his soul, witness to his growth from an ambitious youth to a wise mentor. Ollivander took a sip of tea, which had already grown cold. Sometimes, in particularly difficult moments, he would take it out and simply hold it in his hands. He wouldn't use it, just hold it, as if drawing strength from memories of youth, of mistakes, of forgiveness. "And what about the Elder Wand?" asked the Ravenclaw girl. "You didn't create it." "No," Ollivander shook his head. "The Elder Wand was created by death itself, if the legends are to be believed, or by some ancient master whose name is lost in the ages. But I saw it when Albus came to me for advice." His eyes grew distant. 15 inches of elder wood with a thestral hair core, the most terrible and most beautiful wand I have ever seen. It pulsed with power like a living heart, and around it there was always a feeling of inevitability, as if fate itself had been embodied in wood and magic. Could Albus control it? "Albus did not control it," replied Ollivander. "He tamed it. There is a difference. The Elder Wand recognizes no masters, only conquerors. But Albus was so strong, so wise, that even it was forced to respect him." He rose and again walked about the room. "The most terrible thing about possessing the Elder Wand is not its power. The most terrible thing is the loneliness. For when you have the most powerful weapon in the world, everyone sees you as either an enemy or a target. Albus bore this burden for decades, knowing that sooner or later someone would try to take the wand from him. And someone did try, the Slytherin boy said quietly. Yes, nodded Ollivander, and his voice became heavy with grief. Tom Riddle, Voldemort. He learned about the Elder Wand and decided that only it could help him destroy Harry Potter. Silence again enveloped the room. The students knew this story, but hearing it from Ollivander was quite different. Albus knew this would happen. He had been preparing for it for years, and when the time came, he made the most difficult choice of his life. What choice? He allowed himself to lose, Ollivander said quietly. He allowed Draco Malfoy to disarm him on the astronomy tower, thus transferring the right of ownership of the Elder Wand. And then he allowed Severus to kill him, knowing that Tom Riddle would mistakenly think the wand had passed to Snape. Tears glistened in the old wandmaker's eyes. It was the greatest sacrifice in the history of magic. Albus sacrificed his own life not simply for victory over the dark forces. He sacrificed it so that the most powerful wand in the world would not fall into evil hands. But Harry Potter ultimately obtained it, the Gryffindor girl reminded him. Yes, Ollivander smiled through his tears. Harry obtained it by defeating Draco in a duel. And what did he do with it? He returned the most powerful wand in the world to Dumbledore's tomb. He refused the greatest power in the world for the sake of peace. He returned to his chair and sat down, his face glowing with pride. In that action I saw the true legacy of Albus Dumbledore. Not power, not authority, not glory, but wisdom. Understanding that true power lies in the ability to renounce it. Ollivander gazed into the fire, and the students could see tears rolling down his cheeks. Albus Dumbledore was the greatest wizard I ever knew. Not because he possessed the most powerful wand, but because he had the biggest heart. He made mistakes. Oh, how many mistakes he made. But he transformed each one into a lesson, into an opportunity to become better. Why are you crying? The Hufflepuff boy asked quietly. Because, replied Ollivander, wiping his eyes, I saw him come to me as a youth, full of ambitions and dreams. I saw him grow into a wise mentor, and I saw him make decisions that cost him his life. It is a great privilege to observe the growth of a legend, but also a great pain. He rose and approached the window, looking out at the stars that peeped through the clouds. The cypress wand still exists. It lies in his tomb beside the Elder Wand. 2 wands, 2 epochs of his life, youth and maturity, mistakes and wisdom, ambition and sacrifice. And what do you feel when you think of him? Asked the Ravenclaw girl. Ollivander remained silent for a long time, then smiled, warmly, brightly, with boundless love. Pride. Boundless pride that I was destined to create a wand for the best of men. Albus proved that a wand truly chooses the wizard, but the wizard can choose who to become with that wand. The fire in the fireplace blazed again, as if responding to words about the great wizard. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, covering the world with white silence and peace. And now, said Ollivander, turning to the students, are you ready to hear about another love? About love that gave birth to a hero? About 2 wands that united in one destiny and gave the world the greatest protector. The students nodded and Ollivander smiled, preparing to tell the next story, about Lily and James Potter and how their love changed the course of history. Evening was gradually approaching, but in the room with the fireplace time seemed to have stopped. The students listened, enchanted by the tales of the old wand maker, whilst outside the window the first stars began to peek through the clouds. Ollivander was preparing for the most tender and most painful memories of his life. And now, he said softly, allow me to tell you about a force stronger than any magic, about love, and about how it can change the fate of the world. He rose and approached a shelf with red boxes, those that preserved memories of wands created with particular love. I shall begin with Lily Evans. August 1971. A girl who brought spring into my shop in the midst of summer. A smile illuminated Ollivander's face, and the students felt the atmosphere of the room grow warmer. 11 years old, reddish hair like the flame of a fireplace, and eyes. Oh, those eyes! Emerald green, alive, full of boundless curiosity about the world. She entered the shop holding her Muggle parents' hands, and immediately began looking around with such fascination, as if she had stepped into a fairy tale. Ollivander touched one of the red boxes, and it seemed to pulse gently with warmth. Is this all real? She asked, pointing at the shelves of wands. And when I nodded, she laughed, such a clear, sincere laugh that all the wands in the shop seemed to echo it. Did she immediately fall in love with magic? Asked the Gryffindor girl. More than that, replied Ollivander. Magic immediately fell in love with her. When I began showing her wands, each one responded with unusual warmth. They didn't suit, but they responded, as if all wanted to be chosen by this gentle girl. He returned to his chair, but again remained standing. The first wand, oak with unicorn hair, gave golden sparks, but quickly faded. The second, ash with dragon heartstring, played with silver light, but also didn't suit. And then I felt a special calling. From where? From the shelf with the most tender wands, smiled Ollivander. Willow, 10¼ inches, with a unicorn hair core. Willow, the wood of healing and protection, which chooses those whose hearts are capable of bringing comfort to others. He approached the window, looking out at the first rays of evening light. When Lily took the wand in her hands, something incredible happened. From the tip flowed not simply light, but love. A warm, golden-green aura surrounded her, and in this aura I saw the future. How she would heal the wounded, how she would protect the weak, how she would stand between evil and innocence. The students listened spellbound. But the most beautiful thing was that the sparks from her wand spread throughout the shop and touched other wands. And each wand that this light touched came alive for a moment and sang. I had never before seen one wand awaken magic in others. Did this mean something special? It meant that Lily Evans was born to unite, replied Ollivander. To join what seems incompatible. Magic and wisdom, strength and gentleness, courage and compassion. He returned to the students, his eyes shining with warm memories. Lily paid for the wand. Her parents had exchanged pounds for galleons at Gringotts, and was preparing to leave. But at the door she stopped and asked, Mr. Ollivander, is it possible to learn to love magic even more? I replied to her, Child, magic already loves you as much as is possible. Warm, cozy silence descended upon the room. And then, continued Ollivander, that same August 1971, a few days after Lily, someone came to me who at first seemed her complete opposite. James Potter. His smile became mischievous. Tall for his age, with a shock of unruly black hair and spectacles that constantly slipped down his nose. He burst into the shop like a hurricane, waving his arms and talking about Quidditch, about how he would be the best seeker at Hogwarts. Was he very self-confident? Asked the Hufflepuff boy. Self-confident and energetic, confirmed Ollivander, but not in a bad way. He simply overflowed with life. When I asked what sort of wand he wanted, he replied, The best. One that will make everyone see how brilliant I am. The students laughed. The first wand, oak with dragon heartstring, gave powerful red sparks, but James shook his head. No, that's not it. I need one that will win hearts. The second, ash with unicorn hair, didn't respond at all. And then, Ollivander paused, savoring the moment. Then I retrieved a mahogany wand, 11 inches, with a unicorn hair core. Mahogany, the wood of passion and devotion, which chooses those capable of changing for the sake of love. And what happened? When James took the wand, a stream of gold and red sparks flew from it, swirling around him like a festive firework. But the most interesting thing was not this. The most interesting thing was that among the sparks appeared a figure, the silhouette of a girl with long hair. The student's eyes widened in amazement. You saw Lily and James's sparks? Precisely, nodded Ollivander. The wand showed me his destiny. James looked at the silhouette with such an expression, as if trying to understand who it was. And then he asked, Is this the girl I should love? I replied, Perhaps. But first you need to become someone worth loving. Ollivander sat in his chair, his face becoming thoughtful. James paid and left, but not before asking, What should I do to become better? A remarkable question for an 11-year-old boy who had just been boasting about his future successes. And then they met at Hogwarts? Yes, and at first Lily couldn't stand him, laughed Ollivander. James was too conceited, too arrogant. But his wand was not mistaken, it saw potential. And gradually James changed, became better, for the sake of the one he loved. Silence again enveloped the room, but this time it was sad. And then came October 1981, Ollivander said quietly. The blackest day of my life. The day I learned that two of the most beautiful wands I had ever created lay beside their owners in the ruins of a house in Godric's Hollow. Tears glistened in his eyes. But even in death their love proved stronger than dark magic. Lily gave her life for her son, and this sacrifice created protection that even Voldemort could not overcome. He wiped his eyes and looked at the students. Do you understand now why I say that love is stronger than any magic? Lily and James's wands showed me their destiny, love that would conquer death itself. A long pause. Finally, the Ravenclaw girl quietly asked, "And what about the next generation? Those who came after?" Ollivander smiled through his tears. Hermione Granger, August 1991. A girl who reminded me of young Lily, with the same thirst for knowledge, the same sincere love of magic. He rose and approached another shelf. A shock of curly hair, large brown eyes, and a stack of books under her arm. She entered the shop with a list of all the textbooks for first year, and immediately began questioning me about the history of wand making. Was she like Lily? Both yes and no, replied Ollivander. Lily was intuitive, Hermione was analytical. Lily felt magic with her heart, Hermione with her mind. But both had the same burning thirst to understand the world around them. He touched a brown box. Vine wood, 10 3/4 inches, with a dragon heartstring core. Vine, a rare wood that chooses those who have a hidden purpose, greater than what is obvious. And did it suit Hermione? Perfectly, smiled Ollivander. When Hermione took the wand, pink light poured from it, so warm and cozy. But the most interesting thing was that in this light I saw books, hundreds, thousands of books flying around her like living birds. Books? Knowledge, corrected Ollivander. The wand showed me that Hermione would become a bridge between the magical and non-magical worlds, that her knowledge would save more than one life. And this proved to be true. He returned to his chair. Hermione asked me countless questions about caring for wands, about different types of wood, about cores. When she left, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. I shall try to justify the wand's trust." Never before had an 11-year-old child said such words to me. And Ron Weasley? Ollivander pondered. With Ron the story is special. At first he didn't come to me at all. He used his brother Charlie's old wand. Ash, 14 inches, with unicorn hair, a good wand, but it never chose Ron. It served him out of duty, not love. He shook his head sadly. And then came that terrible business with the Whomping Willow in his second year. The wand broke in half, and Ron tried to mend it with spellotape. Can you imagine? Spellotape on a magic wand. It barely worked, spells flew out the wrong end. A smile returned to Ollivander's face. And then came August 1993. Ron finally came to me for his own wand. He was 13 then, but looked older. Responsibility had made him mature. How did he choose a wand? He was terribly nervous, recalled Ollivander. He said, "I need a wand that will truly be mine. Not my brother's, not someone else's mine." And I understood. This boy was finally ready to become himself, not just a younger brother in a large family. Ollivander rose and approached the shelf. Willow, 14 inches, with a unicorn hair core. Willow, the wood of intuition and emotional depth, which chooses those capable of sensing others' needs better than their own. And did it suit him? Perfectly. Ollivander beamed. When Ron took it in his hands, orange gold light flowed from it, warm as sunshine. And in this light I saw not one figure, but many, friends who surrounded Ron, found in him support and understanding. Was he meant to become someone who unites people? Precisely, nodded Ollivander. Ron was born to be a friend. Not a leader, not a hero, a friend. And that is perhaps the most difficult and most noble calling of all. He paused. When Ron paid for the wand, he asked, "What if it turns out to be too good for me?" I replied, "My boy, a wand that truly chooses you will never be too good. It will be exactly what is needed." Ollivander looked at the students who listened spellbound. Do you know what is most marvelous about all these stories? Lily, James, Hermione, Ron, all of them came to me as children with different characters, different dreams. But each of them had one common trait. What? The ability to love more deeply than themselves, Ollivander replied quietly. Lily loved magic and people. James loved Lily so much that he changed for her sake. Hermione loved knowledge and used it to help others. Ron loved his friends and was ready to do anything for them. The first rays of moonlight penetrated the room, illuminating the old wandmaker's face. "And now," he said, his voice becoming solemn, "it is time to tell you about the wand that united all these destinies. About a boy who grew up in the light of Lily's love and Ron and Hermione's friendship. About Harry Potter and the most remarkable story I was ever destined to witness." The students held their breath. The last story, the most important of all, awaited them. And Ollivander, the last witness to these wonders, was preparing to tell about the boy who changed the world. Night had finally claimed its dominion, flooding the shop with soft moonlight. Ollivander sat in his chair, looking at the four students who had listened to him all day long. Their faces reflected weariness, but also deep enchantment. They sensed they were about to hear the most important story of all. "And now," said the old wand maker, his voice becoming particularly solemn, "it is time to tell you about the wand that changed the course of history, about a boy who came to me on the 31st of July, 1991, and turned everything I knew about wand magic upside down." He rose and slowly approached a special shelf, the one where stood a single empty box with a silver ribbon. Harry Potter, 11 years old, thin, with a shock of unruly black hair and the brightest green eyes I had ever seen. But most importantly, with a lightning bolt scar on his forehead that told the story of the most remarkable victory in the history of magic. The students held their breath. He entered the shop with Hagrid, and I immediately felt something incredible. The magic around him didn't simply pulse, it sang. Every wand in the shop responded to his presence, but not joyfully, as to an ordinary child. No, they sounded with reverence, as if in the presence of a legend. Ollivander touched the empty box, and it seemed his hands trembled with memories. At first I couldn't believe it. The very same Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the one who destroyed Voldemort when he was only a year old. But the scar didn't lie, and his eyes, those eyes were an exact copy of his mother's. Emerald green, full of kindness and sincerity. "Did he know about his fame?" asked the Gryffindor girl. "No," Ollivander shook his head. And that was the most marvelous thing of all. The most famous boy in the wizarding world stood in my shop, looking around with the same wonder as any other child seeing magic for the first time. No arrogance, no sense of being special, only pure curiosity. He returned to the students, his eyes glowing with memories. When I asked which was his wand arm, Harry extended his right, and I noticed it trembled slightly. Not from fear, from excitement. He said, "I've never held a wand before," and in his voice was such sincere enchantment with magic, which I had heard in his mother's voice 20 years ago. Ollivander approached one of the shelves and took an ordinary box. First I gave him a maple and phoenix feather wand to try. It gave a few golden sparks, but quickly faded. The second was oak and unicorn hair. It didn't respond at all. Harry looked at me worriedly, as if afraid he wouldn't be able to use magic at all. And then I understood. I felt a calling, so strong it made me tremble. From the most special shelf, where I kept the rarest wands. Holly 11 inches, with a phoenix feather core. Ollivander fell silent, as if gathering courage for the most important part of the tale. Holly, the wood of protection and overcoming evil. Its wands choose those who need to triumph over great challenges. And the feather, oh, that feather was special. Fawkes, Professor Dumbledore's phoenix, gave only 2 feathers for wands in all his long history. Silence enveloped the room. Even the fire seemed to freeze. When Harry took the wand in his hands, continued Ollivander, something happened that I had never seen before and will never see again. From the wand's tip burst a stream of gold and red sparks, so bright that for a moment I was blinded. But these were not ordinary sparks. They pulsed in time with the boy's heartbeat, and in their light I saw. He paused, searching for words. "What did you see?" whispered the Ravenclaw girl. "Love," Ollivander replied quietly. "Pure, boundless love. A mother's love, who gave her life for her child. Love that became a living shield, impenetrable to the blackest spells. The wand didn't simply choose Harry. It recognized in him the bearer of the strongest magic in the world." Tears glistened in the old master's eyes. But that wasn't all. When the sparks began to fade, I had to tell him the truth. About his wand's brother. About how Fawkes gave only 2 feathers, and the second was in Voldemort's wand, finished the Slytherin boy. Precisely. The yew wand, 13.5 inches, with a feather from the same phoenix. I told Harry about this, and I saw his face pale. But he wasn't frightened. He asked only, "Does this mean I'll become a dark wizard?" Ollivander smiled through his tears. I answered him then what I remember word for word. "Oh no, Mr. Potter. The wand chooses the wizard, and this wand chose you not for your similarity to he who must not be named, but for your opposition to him. You are his antithesis, his refutation." Ollivander walked about the room, his fingers touching various boxes. Over the following years I followed Harry from afar. I heard tales of his adventures at Hogwarts, of how he saved the Philosopher's Stone, how he fought the basilisk, how he conjured a Patronus at 13. "And then came Voldemort's return," the Gryffindor girl said quietly. "Yes," nodded Ollivander, his face darkening. And then the two brother wands met for the first time since that terrible night in Godric's Hollow, in Little Hangleton Graveyard, June 1995. He sat in his chair, sighing heavily. I wasn't there, but I felt it. Every wandmaker in the world felt that moment when two brother wands were forced to battle each other. Priori incantatem, the rarest phenomenon in wand magic. What does that mean? When two wands with cores from the same source are forced to fight, they refuse to harm each other. Instead, they create a connection, a golden beam linking them, and the weaker wand is forced to yield the spells of the stronger. Ollivander gazed into the fire. But this time something incredible happened. Harry's wand proved stronger. Not because it was better made, not because it had a superior core, but because its owner fought for the right cause, for love, for life. And Tom Riddle fought only for power. And what happened? Voldemort's wand was forced to yield its last spells. The shadows of his victims rose from the wand's tip: Cedric Diggory, Frank Bryce, Bertha Jorkins, and at the end, Lily and James Potter. Tears rolled down Ollivander's cheeks. The wands showed Harry his parents, gave him the chance to speak with them, to receive their support. This was magic stronger than any spell, the magic of love conquering death. Silence again descended upon the room. The students sat stunned by what they had heard. But the most terrible was yet to come, continued Ollivander. December 1997. Harry with his friends went to Godric's Hollow, to his parents' house. Nagini, Voldemort's snake, was waiting for them there. His voice became barely audible. During their escape, Hermione accidentally hit Harry's wand with a destructive spell. The wand broke. Holly with Phoenix Feather, the wand that had served him 6 years, that had saved him so many times, split in half. What did Harry feel? Pain, Ollivander simply replied. The pain of losing part of himself. A wand isn't simply a tool, it's an extension of the wizard's soul. When it breaks, the owner feels it like a physical wound. Ollivander rose and approached the window. The following months, Harry used borrowed wands. Hermione's wand, which hated him for not being its owner. A Blackthorn wand, stolen from Snatchers. Draco Malfoy's wand, which he took from Draco during their escape from Malfoy Manor. And then came the final battle? Yes, nodded Ollivander. May 1998. The Battle of Hogwarts. And there Harry did something incredible. He went to meet death voluntarily. Without a wand, without protection, only with faith that his sacrifice would save others. His voice trembled with emotion. But his mother's love, love that lived in his blood, saved him again. Voldemort couldn't kill him because Harry willingly went to his death for the sake of others. He repeated Lily's sacrifice, and the magic of love protected him a second time. And what about the wands? When Voldemort tried to kill Harry with the Elder Wand, which he had stolen from Dumbledore's tomb, the wand refused to obey. For its true master was not Snape, as Tom Riddle thought, but Draco Malfoy, who had disarmed Dumbledore. And Harry, in turn, had disarmed Draco. Ollivander returned to the students. And then the most marvelous thing happened. In the final duel, Harry used Draco's wand, whilst Voldemort used the Elder Wand. But when Tom Riddle cast Avada Kedavra and Harry cast Ordinary Expelliarmus, the Elder Wand refused to fight against its true master. And the spell rebounded? Yes, nodded Ollivander. But not as they tell in tales and legends about the boy who lived. There they make everything much more dramatic. In reality, it was simpler and yet more magnificent. Voldemort cast Avada Kedavra, Harry, Ordinary Expelliarmus. The spells collided, but the Elder Wand refused to fight against its true master. Avada Kedavra simply returned to the one who cast it. Ollivander sat back in his chair, his face glowing with triumph. And then Harry did the most noble deed in the history of magic. He used the Elder Wand only once, to repair his broken Holly wand. And then he returned the most powerful wand in the world back to Dumbledore's tomb. Why? Asked the Hufflepuff boy. Because he understood what Voldemort did not. True power lies not in the wand, it lies in the heart. Harry won not because he had a better weapon, but because he fought for love, for friendship, for everything that makes life worth fighting for. The sun had already set beyond the horizon, and the moon had risen over Diagon Alley, flooding the shop with silver light. Ollivander looked at the students who had listened to him all day. And now, he said, you understand why I say the wand chooses the wizard? Harry could have become a Dark Lord. He had the power, he had direct magical inheritance from Voldemort through that scar. But he chose differently. What exactly? He chose to love instead of hate. Chose to protect instead of attack. Chose to give instead of take. And his wand, the wise holly wand with a phoenix heart, knew from the very beginning that he would make the right choice. Ollivander rose and approached the empty box with the silver ribbon. After the war, Harry came to me several times, simply to talk, to remember. We discussed wand magic, the philosophy of choice, the power of love. And each time I marveled. Before me sat the most powerful wizard of his generation, but also the most modest. Does he still use the same wand? Yes, smiled Ollivander. Holly with phoenix feather serves him faithfully. It went through everything with him: childhood, youth, war, victory. It is part of his soul, his history, his destiny. The old wandmaker returned to the students. And now, my young friends, you know the whole truth. About dark wizards who chose power over love. About teachers who dedicated their lives to serving others. About the greatest of wizards who sacrificed everything for peace. And about a boy who saved the world with the power of a mother's love and his own choice. He looked at them with a wise smile. Remember, a wand does not make the wizard. It merely reveals what is already inside. Each of you has the power to choose who to become. Dark or light, selfish or protective, destroyer or creator. Outside the window, Diagon Alley was preparing for the night's rest. The students slowly rose from their chairs, feeling that this day had changed them forever. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander, said the Ravenclaw girl, for the stories, for the wisdom, for showing us true magic. Ollivander smiled, watching them leave into the evening darkness. And then he returned to the empty box where Harry Potter's wand had once lain. In it there was no wand, but there was memory. Memory of a boy who proved that love is stronger than death, and choice more important than destiny. The fire in the fireplace quietly died down, but warmth remained. The warmth of memories, wisdom, and faith that good will always triumph if there are those ready to fight for it. And Garrick Ollivander, the last of an ancient line of wandmakers, closed his eyes and smiled, knowing he had fulfilled his most important duty. He had passed to the next generation the understanding that true magic lives not in the wand, but in the heart of the one who holds it.